So good evening and welcome to the sixth and final installment of our study of white sail. Not that I think it's a great loss, but for some reason I just can't get the video camera to function. So like I say, not a big loss, but anyway, I have tried. So anyway, the most important really is the subject matter at hand. So today's chapter on karma is an important one, as they all are. You could say that Rinpoche, he operates very much with, you could say, big picture. And particularly because the scope of this work is so much aimed towards the modern person who has been deeply steeped in and educated within and shaped by the discourse of a scientific materialism, which inevitably then is associated with what we call nihilism. And so, as Rinpoche mentioned in the beginning when he set out to present this was very much about transforming nihilist outlook into, or you could say, taking that as the point of departure for engaging in the path of cultivating intangible wisdom phenomena. So coming from that place, then we've actually worked with, like I mentioned last time, an ontological perspective in the first chapters, and then last time in the senses, more epistemological, more sort of how do we know then, and how do we validate our perceptions. And so the last chapter then was about perceptions, and then today with the chapter of karma, we're looking at our actions. On the basis of our perceptions, then we act. And so much of the Buddhist teaching is all about action because, as we would say in the causal vehicle, karma can actually, you could say, sum up the entire message of what the Buddhist teaching is about, in that it exists as the law of how we create our reality, and implicitly also about how we then practice the path and go beyond our conventional reality. So karma is really huge, and it's very much associated with what we then call the dependent arising, understanding how things exist conditionally. So this is big. And also some of you might have attended the last webinar that we did here, which was on Tralik Rinpoche's exposition on karma. And I'd like to say that Tralik Rinpoche and Thinley Norbu Rinpoche are very close. I think that Tralik Rinpoche humbly might have said that Thinley Norbu Rinpoche was his teacher, and I think he very much viewed Thinley Norbu Rinpoche as a sublime spiritual guide. But I'm sure also Tralik Rinpoche, and I think Thinley Norbu Rinpoche has spoke somewhere about the qualities of Tralik Rinpoche. Anyway, they're very close, as great masters are. And hence I would also then, if you want to know more about karma, have a look at the really excellent work by Tralik Rinpoche. It's called Karma, What It Is, What It's Not, and Why It Is Important. So to get down to the matter at the task at hand, let me once again say that this today won't be an exception with regards to possibly going a little bit over time. There's quite a few slides. Then again, some of you might have some background in classical studies, and you'll know that it's often said that when studying the Dharma, you should be patient and be willing to sort of endure and hang in there. So I hope you're all okay with that. So we might go a bit over time. Good. So Chapter 6, Karma. So this quote identifies how these are our actions that construct our confused reality, how it is a cycle that feeds itself. And by the way, that is the quote that we have at the beginning of the chapter, where this is taken from the sutras, where it says, "Alas, samsara is born from karma. From karma, happiness and unhappiness are made. Whenever conditions are gathered, they make karma, and karma makes happiness and unhappiness again." So the different Buddhist schools, they view karma in different ways. What we call the Vibhashika school, they situate the law of karma within what we call our subjective consciousness, the Sutrantika in ordinary continuous mind, the Yogacarya in the basic of all phenomena, and the Madhyamika as dependent arising. So there's different ways of understanding karma depending on, then again, the view that these different schools have. What we have here, what we call the four tenets. So common to all of these is that the path to enlightenment depends on karma. So it depends on causes, it depends on our actions. Now, we speak of the causal vehicle, but Vajrayana is then what we call the resultant vehicle, and it takes what is beyond causation as the path. Phenomena appear. So from the Vajrayana view, phenomena appear that they do not extend beyond the Dharmakaya. Specifically, Thinley Norbu Rinpoche's advice is to sustain the Vajrayana view, yet abide by cause and effect. And this famously we also have from Padmasambhava, although my view is as high as the sky, my action with regards to cause and effect is finer than barley flour. So I actually put up in the, and you might have seen it, I put it up some time ago, but a small piece in the reading, and it's from Khenchen Pema Vajra, a great master from Dzogchen Monastery, who wrote a piece on the three turnings of the wheel. But in there you can see, even in mantra, we still abide by the Four Noble Truths, but there's a very different perspective. So we don't begin with suffering, actually. We begin with wisdom and so on. So it's the Four Noble Truths. Causation still exists in some sense, but it's a very different perspective. The point when we say Vajrayana's scope is beyond causation is that innate reality in itself is beyond causation. And within this reality, we obviously nothing extends beyond the Dharmakaya. So everything that we perceive is this what we call spontaneous present display of wisdom, deity, and mandala. But as much as we keep such a high view of that nature which is beyond cause and effect, as long as we humbly admit that we have duality, a notion of self and other, we do distinguish cause as different from result. But then again, we should also know, in terms of our view, that it is this grasping that keeps us in samsara. Buddhas, and that's presumably a plural there, shouldn't be an apostrophe anyway, Buddhas will benefit everyone according to their disposition. Hence, Buddha would explain the path differently, as with three levels of vows. So the first is the generic Buddhas, the plural, and the second is then referring specifically to the teacher Shakyamuni Buddha. And the Buddha's speech is limitless. And as such, it's subject to many different ways of being understood. And this is an aspect of the Buddha's miraculous way of teaching, that the speech will benefit every being according to their own disposition. So there is a quote from the Samadhi Raj Sutra where it says, Buddha of universal benefit, even within your one word, different sounds occur according to the wishes of different beings. Each one thinks, the victorious one is revealing this to me. And you speak with a smile to anyone. So the universal value of the Buddha, his ability to reach everyone, is then highlighted here. But also, we should understand, and we have these baffling statements like we have in the Vajrayana Sutra, which I think we had quoted earlier on. Those who see me in terms of my form, those who see me in terms of my speech, they will not see the true Buddha. And Buddhas do not have the dualistic mind then that is the basis for karma. For those on the path then, some practitioners, like in the Hinayana, they would strive to abandon karma to attain peace. While Mahayana practitioners, they strive to realize the two kinds of selflessness, to achieve and to perfect the wisdom of non-referential compassion that benefits all confused sentient beings. When we say non-referential compassion, then we're actually saying the same as wisdom. This is where wisdom and compassion, they unite. Vajrayana practitioners, through pure perception of wisdom deity, integrate the cause of suffering karma as the cause of enlightenment. So this is again where you could refer to Khenchen Pema Vajra's exposition on the Four Noble Truths on the Vajrayana level. But in the Vajrayana then, in that there is no sense of suffering, everything is the view of pure perception, then anything that appears and so forth, perceptions, they are seen as the cause of enlightenment. Nothing appealing about karma, nothing appealing about rebirth, nothing appealing about being a ghost. When duality is purified, rebirth is driven by compassion. And this is an important point for, you could say, discussion on karma and rebirth in a contemporary climate. Karma is not a comforting phenomenon, a belief that should ensure our continued existence. It is a severely afflicted and painful condition that needs to be remedied. So we don't have the idea of karma as a sort of a soothing idea or rebirth. Being reborn is not desirable as long as it's driven by karma. We actually have no real sort of control, and the majority of destinies in samsara are painful. Rebirth is desirable when the hoax of duality has been eliminated, when we are awake. Then rebirth is driven by the compassion. An awake person has this caring for others, has no sense of wishing peace for him or herself. So presently, while we're deluded, we're caught by karma. So it's an essential part of the path to purify and accumulate karma. So that's how we address it presently. It's something that we need to take into consideration. It's something that we purify. It's also what enables us to accumulate positive conditions for the path. Nihilists may understand karma in terms of physical laws. For nihilists, continuous mind as a source of phenomena remains a mystery. We can use reasoning to understand karma. When we say that nihilists understand the law of cause and effect, this is, of course, as we know it from the natural sciences. You heat water to 100 degrees Celsius and it starts to boil. So that comes from knowledge of causation. But as far as consciousness goes, as we have seen many times, and within neuroscience itself, there is the acknowledgement that this mind is a mystery. It's what is called the hard problem of science. It's not understood. The obscured view of a sentient being is unlike the unlimited and non-fragmented vision of the Buddha. And hence, you could say for us, mind is also somewhat a mystery, and yet through reasoning we can come to understand how our mind operates, and we can come to understand karma through inferential valid cognition. So we can see continually that our mental actions have an impact. So that we do actually through introspection, which in the early days of Western psychology actually was viewed as valid empirical understanding. In the sutra vehicle, karma is unceasing, like a spring. It transforms according to conditions, like yogurt culture does. So according to the causal vehicle, karma cannot change, as a spring doesn't stop. Even we cover it up with earth and so forth, we can't just say. I remember in the early days in India, you would hear people say things like, I'm so over karma, I'm not going to accumulate more karma. But of course, karma, we're driven by it, and it's unceasing. Then again, the nature of karma is like yogurt culture. It keeps transforming from cause to result to cause again. So we have a yogurt culture that starts to ferment or become yogurt, and then again, what is the result of that becomes the cause of the next batch of yogurt. And the quality of then this continual process, the quality of this depends on the intention behind. Also, we have this famous quote from Dharmakirti: because all phenomena arise in dependency, they dwell on the pinpoint of intention. So karma has three aspects. There's cause, there's circumstance, and there's result. These three are not innately one or the other. Cause and result may be tangible or intangible. So if we look at the three aspects of karma, then there is these cause, circumstance, and result. And they can be different things relative to where we look. For example, in the case of a plant, the seed can be the cause. Then again, as we know, the seed is actually the result from a previous plant, right? Anyway, so the seed is the cause, and then the rain and the sun are the circumstances, and then the plant is the result. So that's generally how we understand karma. But the thing is, in every instance of this process that we have here, seed, the circumstances of rain and sun, the result of the plant, in each instance of this, the particular present condition can be a result, a cause, and a circumstance. The seed, like I said before, can be a result of something previous. The rain and the sun, these are circumstances, but they're also phenomena that are in themselves driven by causes and conditions. And the plant then, yes, that's the result in one way, but it can be the cause for something else, let's say our bread or whatever it might be. So at any stage, we can create new root circumstances through intention, meaning however we view this. If I'm a baker that's waiting for what will enable me to grind produce some flour, I just see the plant, the grain, as as a cause, whereas if I'm a farmer, I view it as the result. So Thinley Norbu illustrates the relativity of these three stages then with a boat, that we could say the making of the boat can be an objective, but if it is a means for a journey, it is a cause, with the arrival at our destination the result. Likewise, our present subjectivity as ego offers the potential for both samsara and nirvana. Unused, the boat is just a result. It is where it is now, with uncertain future, as long as its relationship to other conditions is not known to us. Hence, we cannot know how karmic relationships, we can't know them from our perspective alone. We all see things differently. The intangible causes of intention and attitudes create tangible results in action. So, for example, attitudes that we have, they then bring about intangible attitudes that just we know from our private subjective experience. They result in tangible actions, whereas also tangible actions, tangible phenomena affect our intangible mind. Something external affects us psychologically. Karma is triggered by circumstances across time and space and across lifetimes. Karma is imprinted on the basis of 4 conditions: basis, intention, application, and completion. So those who have studied karma, you'll be familiar with all of these. But anyway, these are really essential in our ways of understanding how karma operates. Karma is that potential that is triggered by circumstances in time and space. What we might dream remains dormant until we go to sleep. The nihilist understanding generally works with an understanding of results as following after the cause without delay. Now, with the example of the dream, karmic results may not manifest in the same life as the creating cause. And we know that. In dreams, all of a sudden something irrationally pops up that we haven't thought about for a long time. Or maybe we don't even know where it comes from. Our present experiences of real events originate with positive or negative impressions that were imprinted on the ground consciousness of Vajrayana, either in past or present lives, depending on the circumstances triggering the manifestation. Karma is imprinted on the ground consciousness through 4 aspects. This is what ends up in our mind, and that is basis, intention, application, and completion. That is what leaves an imprint. So we see something, which is the basis. We then like it or we dislike it. That is then that makes an impression. That's the intention. And then we engage based on our intention. We apply something. I see something, I like it, and then I go get it, or the other way around. And that's then basis, intention, and application. And then once I've grabbed it or pushed it away or whatever, then we have the completion. So these 4, an initial inspiration, an intention that forms on the basis of that, and then doing something, and then completing the action. That leaves an imprint. So these 4 in turn, then, they all depend on the energy of the intention, which has to join all 4 conditions. So in the example of the painter, his object, his intention to paint the object, the brushes he paints the object with, and the completion of the painting are essential for us to speak of an existing painting. And also, as we know then, with regards to intention, there might be a profoundly inspired object for the painter, and hence the whole process infused with a particular energy. So in this way, the energy and intention is basic to all these 4. But that leaves an impression. Causes and results are not eternal. Causes and results are not non-eternal. The conceptual designations of causes and results are interconnected. Small causes can create great results. The relationship of cause and result is unfailing. So these 5 we use to understand the nature of karmic processes. So we don't slot it in with beliefs and metaphysics in the traditional Western sense. Karma is interdependent in 5 ways. When we say interdependence, we are identifying the emptiness yet functionality of relative truth. When we say something is interdependent, when we generally identify karma, it means that we understand that things aren't fixed. It's already there. It points to emptiness, to the wisdom. At the same time, it also teaches us about the relative aspect of how to operate within our relative perceptions. So as for number one, neither the cause nor the result endure or exist permanently or exclusively as either. We look at the seed, right? So it's not as if it always exists as one particular way. They do not function either as a result of their non-permanence. It's not because a seed then is no more that all of a sudden it has created something. There's never ever a moment, you could say, where it's identified as truly existing in one way as the cause or the result. So the labeling of these stages of cause and result are relative to each other, but they have no independent reality apart from these designations. There's nothing mysterious here. It's obvious that we have seed, and then it's sprout, then it's plant, and so forth. But we also we can't label them in either, because they're not permanent. We can't say, oh, then they're non-permanent, or we can't say that they're non-existent because they have a function. So that's important to understand as far as how causes and results, they are interconnected. So there is this. Also, there's the compatibility. You wouldn't have pumpkins coming from apple seeds and so forth. Likewise, also a little seed, talking about pumpkin, a little pumpkin seed can produce a large pumpkin or a large tree. And finally, we say cause and effect is unfailing in their connection. So again, you would again, as per number 3, you would always have a correlation between the two. And so there's always the result of a cause. It might remain latent or dormant for a long time, but eventually it manifests. And also, we can see in our subjective experience of psychology, we don't have happiness, for example, that comes out of the, for example, angry concepts or angry moods. So these 5 are ways of understanding the functionality. And until as long as we're sentient beings, then outer and inner phenomena, they are experienced in these terms of causes and results. And when we then achieve enlightenment, then we see the, you could say, unconditional nature of these phenomena in terms of what we call kayas and jhanas, or bodies and wisdoms. As practitioners, we'd pay attention to how we create karma. If we're aware of the way that moods grip us, then we can see that they have an impact, and also we can see how when we are not caught by them, then they leave less impression. We say if passions are not liberated on arising, they create karma. So these passions, afflictions, or destructive emotions, they arise. But as practitioners, we do have the possibility of liberating them in the sense that we are not caught by them. But if that doesn't happen, then they create impact. If we have a fear of a snake and it's not embraced by wisdom, it imprints on the all ground. So we know this from, for example, from trauma. So there it could remain imprinted on our all ground until gradually then it's liberated through practice, processing, and so forth. So we have different reactions and experiences. Jigmeling-pa then, and Rinpoche quotes the Yönten-Zu, the Treasury of Precious Qualities, where it says the power of the various qualities of whatever seeds exist is clearly shown to the farmers who have planted them. Likewise, the experiences of habits created over other lives have caused the many different aspects of karma and the variations between sentient beings. So the first is something that's the scope of anybody who has grown class. The second is then the scope of sublime beings who understand lifetimes, understand how karma works across lifetimes. Okay, we've come just up around 7 o'clock. So if there's any questions. Yeah, there's one person who wrote sound, but I'm assuming that you can all hear me. Huh? Could I have a confirmation? I'm very much assuming you can hear me, otherwise it's not so good. Yes, good. All right. Actually, there's been some problems with, what was it? I think Firefox. And yeah, it seems to be some of the browsers don't operate so well with the Citrix software, this GoToWebinar software we're using. Yeah, this is unfortunate. In the past, actually, it's been the poor Mac users have had a hard time, but that's luckily since a while that's not the case anymore. We used to save all the files in this format called WMV. That had to be converted, but that's no longer the case. However, it seems one or two of the browsers aren't doing too well, but anyway, seems we're doing okay. Okay, no specific. That's good. Somebody says they're happy with what's working. It's working, so that's good. All right. Well, if there's no questions, I'll just keep going. Yeah. So, if passions are not liberated arising, they create karma. So this is important for meditators. We need to recognize objects as reflections, echoes, or projections. Our perceptions of cause and effect are projections constructed by the fragmented perspective of our passions, the kleshas, and karma. So when we talk about karma, and we do that as something that's driven by the kleshas, this is essentially what drives samsara. So this is at the very, you could say, heart of our path, what really needs to be purified through the path. So we may perceive objects as affecting us, and we need to recognize how our perception of these objects are reflections of our habitual patterns. We saw that in the last chapter. So there we established how, in the senses chapter, we established how objects are reflections or echoes of our subjective all-ground, and they are based on karmic patterning. And this is also something that's discussed to quite an extent in Trungpa Rinpoche's Karma book. So when we are attracted, it's not just the external reality affecting us, but it's also, as Rinpoche says, our previous habits of the reality of those objects reflecting back to us. So it's so much about our perception of an apparently external reality that is created through previous habit. Our dualistic perception is that objects, they affect each other. But these effects, they're projections that are constructed by our kleshas, our afflicted emotions, and karma, the actions. So in our waking state, we have attraction or aversion, and this affects our dreams. And then the dreams, in turn, they can affect our waking experience. So the strength of a karmic effect is based on the intensity of passions as they're shaped by intentions, as in someone losing in a competition then and making a resolve to win. So due to previous karma, then they lose, but then they make a resolve to win, and that creates the strength then of a new action, new drive. So in samsara, we're a bit lost because we don't realize that we are battling windmills of our own mind's apparition. We think there's something out there, and they really are in this attractive or repulsive way. In fact, these are just our projections. The perception of an object that triggers aversion is based on our subjective intention, as we just discussed. Such aversion can manifest its own object, creating our realms of perception across the cycle of life after life. This also applies to other kleshas, such as attachment. So when aversion arises, it's based on a sense object that we perceive as repulsive or disgusting. So we have aversion. When we look, this is based on a disposition for aversion that projects outward. So this, I think we can all understand, that we actually have some disposition that labels something as repulsive. However, so it is, as Thinley Norbu says, that it comes from our mind and it goes to our mind. We actually experience this negative feeling as intrinsic to the objects. This is where we are mistaken, right? We think there's somebody out there that's good or bad. And this escalates with reaction patterns of aversion that then feeds the perception of solidity. So even if we are not in the presence of the object, the emotion or of aversion or disgust can return by the power of the previous aversion. Like we remember it or it comes up. And this then creates further, this is again, we don't liberate it then, it's further patterns, it creates further objects. And that's independent of the external reality. So this tendency and pattern carries across over time and place and over lifetimes and realms. And this is the tiring cycle of samsara. So this dynamic pattern of confusion we've seen here in the case of aversion, of course, also applies to attachment. Now, the bodhisattva is not caught by delusion. Bodhisattvas act for others through the power of their compassionate prayers. So this comes with the afterglow of meditation, what we call post-meditation. And the Tibetan jeto means just the, it's more, afterglow is a very good translation. It really just means what comes as a result of, or what spills into the afterwards, post-meditation. Finally, the bodhisattva's action is without duality altogether. So this is something that gradually takes place then in terms of the bodhisattvas working with an understanding of action. While the bodhisattvas then are not caught by delusion and see through the constructs of confusion, as we described above, they act for others and they have empathy for others, how others suffer. So the bodhisattva's compassionate actions are driven by the power of their pure prayer. You might have seen this before, that the after enlightenment, the Buddha's activity is driven by the bodhisattva prayers at the time of the path. Compassion is part of undiluted phenomena and happens naturally. And working for others emerges spontaneously in the bodhisattva's post-meditation. So, and this is, you can say, what comes out of a bodhisattva's practice. Although bodhisattvas, they appear ordinary, this is only the subtle residual of obscuration, like the scent left in an empty perfume bottle. And as their meditation is then perfected, it exhausts duality, and they become more powerful in benefiting others. Finally, there's not even the residue of karma, and then we just speak of that as Buddha activity. In Vajrayana, bodhisattvas are viewed as inseparable from Buddhas. Non-referential compassion is the nature of the Nirmanakaya. Okay, now according to Vajrayana, bodhisattvas are no different from the Buddhas. So, for example, we would venerate His Holiness Sakya Trinzen, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and so forth as Buddhas. Of course, we would say these are great bodhisattvas, but they're no different in terms of the Buddhas. We say actually the qualities are the same, but their kindness is even greater because they're present within our lives. And so we say they're manifestations of enlightenment. This compassion is not different from the soul space of wisdom, which is non-referential. So being without the confused fixation on subject, object, and action, the Nirmanakaya appearance, the manifestation of a great being, is inseparable from the Dharmakaya. So we would say that what makes a great being, as great as they are, is this absence of dualistic fixation. Hence also we would, great beings, they would, for example, they wouldn't think, wow, I'm really wonderful doing this for all these beings. They just wouldn't have these three aspects of fixation, namely subject, object, and action. The root of karma is the ignorance that begets duality, that gives rise to the kleshas and which drive the actions. This is, again, a really key way of understanding what is samsara. We have fundamental ignorance, thinks self, and then thinks others. And what comes out of that once you have self and other? Well, you have likes and dislikes, the kleshas. And what does that do? Well, it drives us to act. And that leaves patterns. And that creates who we are. And that's how samsara revolves. Now, if we could see through this, and we do that through practice, infusing our perceptions with wisdom through meditation and post-meditation practices, this opens our eyes. So, essentially, we are caught up in this ignorance, its projections, and the karmic actions. And so, at the very core of what drives our actions is this ignorance, and as a result we suffer. So to be released, we need to address the root of this cause, and that's the fundamental ignorance, duality, and then the kleshas that manifest as a result. So hence we have practices like meditation, we have practices like lojong that affects or works with the kleshas, and these practices then are what you could say, no, these kleshas and karma, there is what lies at the core of our addiction to objects, as Rinpoche calls it. Engaging in the practice of dispelling the grip of these passions will enable us to assimilate the blessing and the wisdom of the Buddha's teaching. So when we begin to dismantle confusion, then more and more we appreciate the brilliance of the Buddhas and also their teachings. We are asleep in what is perfection. The Buddha kindly awakens us. So we have this example in the sutras of a person that's asleep in a beautiful palace, yet suffering from a nightmare. So the Buddha sees the suffering this person undergoes. Despite in actual reality, this person is present in a luxurious palace. So we sentient beings, we're similar. There's nothing wrong with reality, but we're on drugs. We're having this nightmare. And as such, we're hallucinating. So there's nothing wrong with what we call nature. There's nothing wrong with who we are, apart from this hallucinatory condition of fixating on a self and projecting onto the other. Rinpoche, he says, sentient beings are in the dark sleep of unknowing, creating their samsaric misery. Buddha guides us towards his own pure appearances through his reflection of unobstructed wisdom, so that all beings can awaken to the same measureless radiance. So we need to liberate confusion through acting in accord with relative reality, positive actions. This leads us to purified delusion altogether, beyond relative and absolute reality. And actually, if you look in the text, then there's a paragraph which you can say 93.3, and it's really, it's like the essence of this entire chapter. I'll read it, even though we're going to do disastrous with regards to time. Anyway, by acknowledging that mind is continuous and the root circumstance of all phenomena, we must try to recognize its pure essence, which is Buddha nature. We must try to transform temporary obscurations into positive, contributing circumstances in order to become the same as all Buddhas. We must try to distill the pure essence from the unclear confusion of subject and object, which remains in the fragile coincidence container of our nihilist habits fragmented mind. Instead of creating impure and contradictory phenomena which are the cause of suffering, we must create pure and complementary phenomena through positive habits that create positive karma in our continuous Buddha nature land until we transcend the phenomena of relative truth and attain enlightenment. So this essentially is understanding the two levels of what we call two truths. There's the absolute truth, and which is beyond delusion altogether, and yet to get there we need to operate with the relative conditions, relative truths. That's where we need positive actions. We cultivate positive actions and we avoid negative actions. Insight into the constructed nature of our reality should not lead us to reject the value of positive actions. Intention is everything. So it's quite common to belittle then the value of our actions when we analyze reality. If we study Madhyamika, Dzogchen, Mahamudra, and we come about to understand, well, there's no real solid reality in this. That's another kind of nihilism that solidifies a conceptual fixation on what is then perceived as an absence. This is a complete mixing up. In fact, Rinpoche, he says in his commentary on the Madhyamika Avatar, he says, the more we understand emptiness, the more we abide by the truth of cause and effect and karma. So if we fall into this nihilist view, then it prevents both elimination of negative patterns and also it prevents increasing of positive actions. So our attitudes about karma is in itself a reflection of how we are governed by habitual patterns, as karma is entirely phenomenology and has nothing to do with belief or metaphysical suppositions. So it's so much that we can understand karma, of course, is karma. But then again, if we are willing to analyze and properly understand, this actually corresponds very much to what we in modernity endorse as what is beyond metaphysical, understanding. It's simply just the working of phenomena in terms of consciousness. It's what we call phenomenology. So it's something that even in ordinary nihilist context could be understood. But of course, here we go into a different dimension of consciousness that takes into account its uncompounded nature. And as such, it's something that extends beyond just being an emergent property of unconscious systems. But valuing then the truth of karma strengthens our intention and our resolve to act constructively. So this intention is essential. And then also we say, Rinpoche quotes, the difference between virtue and non-virtue only depends on intention, not on the size of the form of virtue and non-virtue. And this is very tricky. This is really subtle. And this enables us to truly understand what karma is. It's got nothing to do with what we do in terms of action, but it's about the intention we bring to the action. And this, of course, is, you could say, the strength of Buddhist ethics. It doesn't provide some narrow, absolute mold for what's right and wrong. But at the same time also, it brings us to an understanding of its complexity. Anyway, this is essential if we're going to understand karma, and it's helpful then sometimes if we want to sort of rise above some of the confusion of modern day debates on ethics. Western beliefs easily misconstrue the nature of karma. So we need to remember that. One, karma is not fatalism. Karma is awareness of the impact of what we do. And we say karma is responsibility. So Rinpoche says, belief in the karmic system is not an excuse for accepting whatever happens, but it's an impetus for creating what we wish to happen. So there's often this thing that comes from the old Orientalists and also in some Indian systems, but really not all of them. I mean, like the Hindu systems, and that's this fatalistic view on karma. And that famously then is associated with disempowerment, passivity, and so forth. But we need to understand karma does not mean passivity. On the contrary, it means to take responsibility. An understanding of karma leads us to do something immediately about our own situation, as if our hair had caught fire. And for others, watching someone we can help that's about drowning. So if we see someone about to drown, we do whatever we can. So the view is really the foundation for compassion and also right view. It's not about purifying what has happened in the past as much as it's about creating the positive future circumstances for ourselves and others. So it's very much about creating the foundations for what we wish to happen. So the result of karma is not obvious due to our obscurations. In terms of valid cognition, it belongs to what we call Korjurgitsema, which is the hidden objects of valid cognition. But it can still be understood through inferential valid cognition. Even in ordinary life, observing cause and effect is not obvious. If we, for example, we have a seed and so forth, it's not obvious how it works, or some things that are, you could say, difficult to see where they come from. Karmic seeds are implanted on our lives. So when it comes to our consciousness, this is where they abide. So, and then of course we hear it all the time if we have these discussions that some might say, well, as much as we perform positive actions, there's still those who experience suffering. So there's no rhyme or reason. So we cannot obviously always understand the relationship between cause and effect or the circumstances. But the inability of us to understand what is the cause what is the cause of result, or the result of a cause, that's due to our obscuration. That just like we can't always exactly know how it happens that things do go as they go in the physical world. Even natural sciences are in the dark with many, many phenomena. So dualistic mind always fluctuates between happiness and suffering as a result of this dualism. This, Rinpoche says, is the unrelenting and tiresome nature of samsara. This lack of conspicuous relationship between the happiness, between and its causes, between suffering and its causes, this, of course, applies when we also look at people, and so we don't always necessarily see the correlation between what people do and the results. But at the same time, we know that we never have any circumstances where we can observe that things just happen without any cause. So when it comes to our mental states and the attitudes that cause our mental states, we want to understand that we need to create particular causes if we want to have particular results. So these actions that we then create, they might not have a result right away, but they remain then dormant within our continuous ordinary mind. So even though it's not directly perceived, we can still understand karma through inferential cognition. We can even see it with the shifting in our attitudes, in our ordinary perceptions, how that changes things on a very immediate level. So we can infer the connection between cause and effect, and as with many things then, in the fragmented perception of relative truth, it happens that our subjective, right now who we are, prevents us from fully understanding that. So it's quite common then as ordinary beings that we misinterpret what we are perceiving. Rinpoche makes that point. So misunderstanding cause and effect, powerful ordinary beings wreak havoc. Our connections are inconceivable. Some interpretations reflect wishful thinking. So we have, for example, powerful beings that create wars as a result of the karmic energy or decisions that they make on the basis of the relationship that exists between them in relative truth. So that happens. Now, understanding karma, it helps us to understand how we can manage or miss the chance to connecting between people or groups. And also that sometimes we make an effort, we cannot connect. There's just no karma. So we could say that the connections that we have between ourselves and beings, they are simply difficult to grasp. This we know. Now, as we saw earlier about this idea of karma as being some sort of a comforting idea or rebirth and so forth, then we have cliches around karma. And there's very often the sense that we would say, oh, that's meant to be. Like there's some sort of like something that we feel good about, and that's as if we caused it. And then there's when undesirable things happen, then we view that as regrettable. But then we think that's just an accident. So all these kind of uninformed ideas about karma can be quite silly. Now, in the dimension of Vajrayana, then on the dimension of deity or the abiding purity of phenomena, we say that in Vajrayana, we view all appearances as wisdom. That's a view that we have, including what ordinary beings see as karma. Now, this is tricky because that's where we as practitioners you could say we can apply this to ourselves, but it's also something that we can't really share with others. You know, you can't say that, you know, something goes bad for somebody, and we might see that we would have the view that whatever arises is inseparable from the nature of reality. That we can't see if somebody has something that they experience that's undesirable. But this is then the scope of the Vajrayana, and that's where we can change. When we experience negative karma, we can change that into something positive through then a determined mind that is able to join wisdom with skillful means. And that's transforming karmic phenomena into wisdom activity. So this entirely depends on our view. In and of themselves, actions manifest as reflections in a mirror. Confused perceptions classify what happens according to their eternalist or nihilist outlook. So you can say our ground is pure, but by having preferences, we ignore the pure nature of appearances. They're more like, but the appearances themselves, apart from how we ignore them, they are like reflections in a clear mirror. But once we then begin to ignore the nature of phenomena, then we have these ways of classifying the content. We then say, oh, it happens for no reason, or it happens the will of God, or whatever. So trying to understand cause and effect through analysis again leads us to miss the point of non-dual wisdom. So this is from the point of view of wisdom or reality, absolute truth. And then that further solidifies the object. And that causes more fixation, kleshas, and karma. So as long as there is dualistic mind, there is this circular creation of negative and positive karma. Now we purify this through practice of recognizing and sustaining stainless wisdom mind, as Rinpoche says. We basically achieve this through whatever level of practice we're at. We call it vipassana, we call it deity, whatever. Purifying karma or practicing virtue could lead to dualistic self-righteousness. We need meditation to experience non-duality and lightness. Meditation purifies, and karma prevents it from leaving new imprints. I think that and, forget the and so just the last one is meditation purifies karma and prevents it from leaving new imprints. Okay? So without wisdom, our attempts to purify karma could lead to being moralistic and self-righteous. We were in a particular way, we then become better, and then all of a sudden we begin to see others as being terribly at fault. Actually, it reminded me of something that years ago reading Hess and Damien. He actually, I found the place where it says, this is Hess saying, if you hate a person, you hate something in him that is part of yourself. What isn't part of ourselves doesn't disturb us. So that kind of reflects that. And this moralism that we sometimes have, because we've just graduated to a higher view, very often leads us to be incredibly judgmental of others. So the wisdom then that's free from that comes from meditation. And it's only meditation that enables us to release then holding on to a self and enables us to experience detachment and lightness. Meditation purifies karma and it prevents new karma from settling. Rinpoche says it's like dust falling into fire, it gets entirely consumed. In non-dual wisdom mind, all appearances manifest as the power of wisdom and qualities. Dualistic mind discriminates and has attachment and aversion. Samsara is endless possibilities of confusion. Awakening is endless compassion. Understanding karma is to understand the nature of this endless confusion. So this is again all about the optics that we bring. Non-dual mind is not alienated from any phenomenon, and hence all appearances manifest without conceptualization as an expression of the power and qualities of wisdom. So this is the scope of great meditators. It's through then duality that we mistakenly discriminate between negative and positive phenomena, aversion and attachments. The Buddhas are free from this and abide in self-existing, stainless reality. So samsara is endless possibilities of becoming. The Tibetan word sipa, becoming. It's all about becoming. So in the awake condition, when we're beyond that, then we're not driven. Then rather this endless possibility becomes transformed into endless compassion, limitless compassion. So in the deluded condition, there's no limit to the confusions we can have. And in the awake state, there's no limit then to the compassionate activity. Karma is intrinsic to the dualistic condition of relative truth. So as long as there is relative truth, there is karma. There's a quote then from Atisha where he says, there is no end to karma until dualistic conceptions are exhausted. So therefore, you must take into account the result of cause. Actually, Rinpoche says, translates as, so therefore you must believe in the result of cause. So applying knowledge of karma in the causal vehicle is the practice of the two accumulations. Until we realize non-dual wisdom, we apply these accumulations. The various paths eliminate dualistic delusion through their various approaches. In the Hinayana, we abandon passion. In the Mahayana, we realize selflessness and Buddha nature. And in Vajrayana, we realize then the purity of abiding reality. So when we understand then karma and the conditions, we practice the two accumulations. Where that is essentially the actions that create relative favorable conditions for relative truth, and wisdom that sees the nature of reality in absolute truth. So this we need to continue doing until we have non-dual wisdom. And the various paths then, they facilitate this. Those who follow the Hinayana, they eliminate passions. The Mahayana, they realize selflessness and they attain enlightenment and through the cause of Buddha nature. And the Vajrayana is then fully realizing the purity of reality as it is. So any perception of cause and result is from our subjective viewpoint. As we saw earlier, the farmer sees the grain as the result, the baker sees it as the cause. The degree to which we perceive the relativity of our own view, to that extent we are wiser. That means, this is again coming back to that 6 and 9, depending on us understanding how our view is particular to where we are coming from, right? So then we're wiser, we understand essentially dependent arising or even emptiness. Now Vajrayana is the scope of that wisdom which is beyond cause and effect. And that wisdom, you can say, is not something that's created. We can create the conditions for realizing it, but wisdom in itself is unconditional. The specifics of karma is uniquely the scope of omniscience. So it's really only a Buddha that fully understands all the particulars of a karmic situation. Karma only becomes manifest when the conditions are there. So it's only when the right conditions happen, then the seed of the original karmic imprint becomes manifest. Cause and effect are not intrinsic to phenomena. So we can say that we can't say if something like a rice sprout is a cause or a result, right? You have this rice seed, you can't say if it's intrinsically a cause or an effect. That depends on how we view things. Now, to claim we do not believe in something, that is to believe in something else. So we have that. Very often we hear this, I don't believe in anything, right? So not believing in something is just having another dogma. The general nihilist view on cause and effect overlooks subjectivity. So in general, you could say the materialist view is understanding cause and effect as it exists in the, you could say, tangible aspects of objective phenomena that can be quantified and measured. But as far as the way that we perceive things and the way that we look on both causes and effects, that's entirely something that's relative. And the nihilist view doesn't actually take that into account. So again, coming back to the seed that can either be a cause or a result. Purifying the ignorance that labels phenomena unveils pure wisdom phenomena. So as much as we practice the causes that creates the conditions where we can purify ignorance, the wisdom phenomena that we come about and unveil then, that is unconditional. So this is what we visualize in Vajrayana as and integrate through the four empowerments. So when we talk about Vajrayana deity, this is this unconditional nature that lies at the basis of our reality, both in terms of the subjective dimension of person and also the perceived dimension of the objective realm. So we talk about deity, mandala, and so forth. And this vision of purity we then gradually integrate through the four empowerments. the first empowerment on, you could say, on a conspicuous level, and then the following empowerments increasingly integrate this realization in a progressively more and more subtle way. So as the Vajrayana, this is then Rinpoche is saying, as Vajrayana teaches, we must change our ordinary deluded reality's identification of phenomena by practicing and creating positive habit until becoming habitless Buddha. Again, this is an important one. In reality, the labels we give phenomena are baseless. We will need to break our habit of labeling. Now, of course, we give labels because it's practical, but we also need to know that there's no basis for it. If you look in Madhyamika teachings, we will say that no phenomena can withstand analysis, particularly if we apply what's called the Rinpoche, which means the absolute reasoning or the reasoning of absolute analysis. And that means basically if we look into any given phenomena, we would not be able to find any essence, no true inherent existence. So the path is all about us breaking our habit of labeling. Rinpoche quotes from the Samadhi Raj, where he says, whenever a child is born, someone gives him a name of this or that. But if one searches for that name, it cannot be found anywhere. It must be found that all phenomena are like that. So there's not a single phenomenon that if we look at it, it cannot be grasped as ultimate. So it's a bit like with an adult that looks at a rainbow. You know, for the child, rainbow is real. For the adult, they know it appears, yet it's not that solid. So Rinpoche says that we should break our loyal habit of clinging to reality, and that would enable us to transform our perceptions and integrate phenomena on the path of enlightenment. So this we do actually already from the very start of the Buddhist path, that we transform our perceptions. And particularly then it becomes more and more enhanced in the skillful means of the Mahayana and the Vajrayana. So we cannot know all about cause and effect. Our perception is founded in delusion. So this is what we talked about before. But attributing reality to things is based on the notion of non-existence. So we are, you could say, there's no reality in our shifting circumstances. We map causes and effects, and we try to understand possibilities, but they have no inherent reality. They cannot be understood. The nature of phenomena cannot be understood with this. Dualistic mind cannot understand the nature of phenomena. So we're trying to give some reality to things that actually don't exist. So either existence or non-existence are no more real than the horns of a rabbit. As we know, rabbits don't have horns, and hence the horns of a rabbit is the classical image for something that's non-existent. And hence Tibetan lamas who would visit places like Wyoming or Utah or Colorado, where there's these joke postcards with what they call the jackalope, they were delighted to send these back to their friends back in Asia. I think Tolsek Rinpoche was mentioning when Dilgo considered to travel to Colorado, he got one of these jackalope postcards and sent it back to him. So here we have one. Anyway, our existence is no more real than a dream. We can perceive deluded reality, or we can be partially deluded, or we can be undeluded. So we, as sentient beings, we are deceived by phenomena just like a child believing that a firebrand twirled quickly is a solid ring of fire. And so gradually we can have less and less delusion. Sublime beings, adults, they will know they will have slightly less delusion, and sublime beings have no delusions at all and just see what we call pure display. So we have the paths that purify our deluded perceptions. In the causal vehicle, Buddha nature is unveiled through the path. And in Vajrayana, Buddha nature is seen as abiding reality. So throughout all the paths, we infuse our perceptions with wisdom. In the causal vehicle, then, we would say that the Buddha nature is a cause, and it's actually more than just unveiled. We would actually say that Buddha nature is the cause for enlightenment. The Vajrayana is more than the notion that it's already there. And so in the Uttara Tantra we have these images of a Buddha statue that's not seen because it's in a mold. But when we remove the mold, then we're not seeing something that has been created, but we're seeing then what is the already existing abiding reality. So this abiding nature is always there, and that is this spontaneous presence, which is the scope of the Vajrayana. And the Vajrayana is something that is very subtle, and it needs to be known and learned from a highly realized master in a, you could say, situation of apprenticeship, where the student is sufficiently sensitive and has the right condition to properly understand what is being talked about. So it is a bit like we would say the sun. It might not be perceived, but it's still there. And so this abiding reality is something that is engaged through dispelling temporary obscuring clouds. When we look up at the obscured sky, we know that the sun is behind. And so in a way we have a visualization of the sun up there. If we think of the space up there and we think of the sun, we're not thinking of just reimagining something that's not there. We can visualize the sun up there, and we visualize it with the certainty that this is how it is. So likewise also the Vajrayana practitioner, through the practice of visualizing, is not imagining that phenomena are in one way or another. It's like a nice rosy daydream, but rather this is a way of practicing to see what is actually there, even though it might not be immediately apparent due to these obscurations. Now, with an understanding of karma, we can understand and generate pure intention, and ultimately we go beyond karma altogether. So this is concluding the chapter. So sentient beings, they wander in samsara, driven by karma. They go through then the higher and lower realms of confusion. And if we understand karma, we generate great intention that is then the foundation for temporary and ultimate happiness. We understand how we can shape our actions with the changing of intentions. And of course, ultimately, we go through karma altogether through wisdom. So Thinley Norbu quotes the Buddha, you can have rebirth in higher or God realms, but without the intention to reach enlightenment, you cannot reach enlightenment. But with intention, you can definitely reach enlightenment. So intention is so important. So we're not just going sort of working with some limited conditions, and hence Rinpoche here quotes from the letter to a friend, or message to a friend from Nagarjuna, and he then says, some beings go from dark to dark, some go from dark to light, and some go from light to dark. May you go from light to light. So the first one has to do with being caught in samsara. The second is the conditions that we work with within samsara. And the final one then is to have the vision of enlightenment that is beyond, which is then the from light to light. So just to reiterate, Thinley Norbu quoted Longchenpa early on, and that's more about these two accumulations, which is implicit in this discussion, which is the wisdom that recognizes emptiness while abiding with awareness of action's effect, with bodhicitta then gradually being without reference point. So Longchenpa, he famously says, act this from, I think we call it 30 advices from the heart. So he says, act from emptiness, knowing the effects of your actions. When you understand not doing, observe the three vows, meaning the pratimoksha, the bodhisattva, and the vijaydhara vows. With non-referential compassion, work to help beings. Keep the two ways of growing inseparable. That's my sincere advice. So this is referring to the two truths. Non-referential compassion is then the ultimate way of working for sentient beings. That's both the compassion and the wisdom. And so with these two ways, wisdom and means, then we traverse the path. So that's from Longchenpa. So I should say I'm a little bit aware of the inadequacy of this summary, and again, because this writing is so profound, please read it again and again and treat yourself to reading Rinpoche's sublime words. So this is actually where we are beginning to come to an end. Again, any questions? Okay. Yes, it's true. The Citrix works well with the Google Chrome. Yes, I think also somebody looked into it, and it seems that Citrix went into has some contract with Google. And so, okay, there was some cutting out of sound at one point. I hope the recording, if there's anything that cut out, please refer to the recording. And then there's a question with regards to the Vajrayana and transmuting something with wisdom and skillful means. What does it mean when one is going through a tough time and a spiritual friend refers to it as ripening of karma? Well, that's actually the spiritual friend that is just being generally, I always think this is completely insensitive when Buddhists, they sort of just refer to stating the obvious like karma, because it's sort of, it's just not really sensitive to how it's experienced, because I think we all know things are karma, and it's sometimes redundant to just say, oh, that's just karma. But as a Vajrayana practitioner, and as a practitioner in general, I mean, we have to appreciate where they're coming from. But if we are Vajrayana practitioner, yes, then there is the sense of the events in themselves are, well, even if we're not Vajrayana practitioners, negative events are actually seen as purifying our karma. And that is, you say, the skillful means that engages the wisdom. But if you look at the teaching by Kenshin Pema Vajra, we in the Vajrayana actually say any perception, and Rinpoche, he also says this again and again, any perception that we have, we understand that it really just exists according to our particular outlook. And so in that sense, we have this wisdom. And to integrate it is what we then effectively achieve through the method aspect of Vajrayana, where we, for example, could have deity pride, so that anything that we're experiencing, anything we perceive, we actually see it as a deity. And as such, we could say we have the sense of humor, we have the courage and so forth that enables us to transmute whatever is perceived. So I don't know if there's more questions. If not, okay. Well then, like I said, we've reached the end of this particular section. Now, the second part of the book, we're going to then take, that we're going to study then in November and December, November 3rd through December 8th. And again, the reason why is, as you can see here, this book is something where you want to savor the profundity of the language and what's implied. So please practice and use this as part of practice. Without practice, these words just become incredibly dense and incomprehensible. But if we're sensitive to practice, then it becomes something that very much inspires our understanding. So that's it. And just before we conclude, as some people might know, since Rinpoche passed away some years ago, and according to then the tradition, then there has been looking for some rebirth, and this is then the rebirth of Thinley Norbu Rinpoche, and here we have his long life prayer. So I put both the picture and the long life prayer up in the reading material. So I think that's it here. I think I'll just chant through it. Om Swasti, by the blessings of the fearless and fierce lotus, may the yogin of the luminous and spacious expanses, majestic three secrets be gained. His activity flourish and his lotus feet. I think it's his. Yes, may the yogin of the luminous and spacious expanses, majestic three secrets be gained. His activity flourish and his lotus feet be always firmly planted, an ornament to this world. So this is, I think we have a rough translation, but anyway, this was spoken by the incarnation of Dudjom Rinpoche at the request of Thinley Norbu Rinpoche's son, Jakob Leschly. So, thank you. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish, ever more and more. Ever absorbed in the display of divine forms and primordial awareness, appearance, sound, and perception in the state of deity, mantra, and dharmakaya. May I, inseparable from the practice of the profound and secret great yoga, attain within the essence of mind the state of white taste. Thank you.